deal's a deal. Here is your $1.
Just $1? That's all I'm worth?
Take it and go.
The snowy night and that single dollar. In the far northern mountains, there was a valley so remote that even sunlight arrived more like pale fog than real warmth. People called it Black Hollow. Old stories said the stars hesitated to shine here at night, and the moon frequently hid behind clouds as though ashamed to be seen. High above the tree line, where forest gave way to nothing but rock, ice, and wind, stood a single tiny cabin. Inside lived Dara. No one knew Dara's exact age. Some guessed mid-40s, others closer to 60. His face was permanently weathered by sun, frost, and wood smoke. His beard and hair had long ago turned the same iron-gray white. His eyes were sharp, too sharp, like they could read thoughts you hadn't even admitted to yourself. He was not an ordinary mountain man. He was the last hunter in these parts who still used a traditional bow and handmade arrows instead of a rifle. The reason was simple. One cartridge cost more than a month's worth of food, and Dara never had savings. That night the snow was falling hard, almost horizontally. Wind screamed through cracks in the cabin walls. Inside the fireplace, only 2 small logs still glowed weakly, already dying. Dara reached under his old sheepskin coat and pulled out a small cloth pouch. Inside were exactly 3 things. Single worn $1 bill, given to him perhaps 10 years earlier by a lost tourist. He had never spent it. A tiny silver ring, the only thing his mother had pressed into his hand before she died. A folded piece of paper with some English writing on it. He had no idea what it said. He looked at the dollar bill for a long moment and muttered, "You haven't been useful for a long time, but just existing keeps my pride alive." Suddenly, there was a sound outside. Not a howl or a branch breaking, a soft, tired, deliberate knocking. Dara listened. This was no animal. Animals don't knock like that. This was a human hand, very weak. He stood, picked up his walking staff, which was really an old spear whose iron tip had broken off years ago, and opened the door. A white wall of snow and wind hit him. Right in front of the doorway stood a woman. She was completely wrapped in a black hooded cloak. Only her eyes were visible, and those eyes were so deep they seemed to contain the entire night. Her whole body trembled violently. No bag, no staff, no extra blanket, nothing to protect her from storm. Dara asked, "Who are you?" The woman did not answer. Instead, she slowly extended one shaking hand. In her palm was a small cloth bundle. Dara stepped aside and motioned her inside. She entered very carefully, as though she did not quite believe any place could be safe. The moment the door closed behind her, Dara threw his last piece of wood onto the fire and said, "Sit close. You're freezing." She sat near the hearth, but kept her face hidden beneath the hood. Then she opened the small cloth. Inside was a little wooden box. When she lifted the lid, a faint golden gleam escaped. There were 3 items. An old gold coin, maybe 100 years old or more. A small sapphire ring. A folded piece of paper with a hand-drawn map. Dara studied the objects, then looked at her and asked, "What is all this? And why did you bring it here?" For the first time, the woman spoke. Her voice was very soft, almost fragile, but perfectly clear. "I came to ask you for one thing only." Dara raised an eyebrow. "Say it." She took a slow breath and said, "I need only $1. Silence. Dara stared at her for several heartbeats. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out the same faded $1 bill he had carried for a decade. He held it out to her. "Here." She took the note, looked at it for a second, then slipped it somewhere beneath her cloak. Next, she pushed the little wooden box toward him. Gold coin, sapphire ring, and map all together. "Take these," she said. Dara gave a short, dry laugh. "I gave you $1. You're giving me gold and a jewel? Is this a joke?" She lifted her head, just enough for the firelight to catch her eyes. There was something strange and bright in them now. "This is not a joke," she said quietly. "This is a deal. You gave me $1. In return, I'm giving you everything I still own. But there is one condition." Dara waited. "What condition?" She spoke very slowly. "You will take me out of this valley, as far as you can walk, as far as your legs will carry us. And when I tell you to stop, you stop. And whatever happens after that, you do not look back." Dara drew a long breath. Outside, the storm had grown even wilder. Branches cracked somewhere in the darkness. The fire was almost gone now. Only red embers remained. He looked straight into her shadowed face and asked, "What is your name?" She answered, "You cannot know my name yet. When the time is right, I will tell you." Dara nodded once. "Fine. We wait for morning. The storm has to die down first. Then we leave." She lowered her head again. After that, neither of them spoke. The night grew deeper. Snow kept falling, and inside Dara's chest a strange, quiet unease slowly expanded. He did not yet understand what bargain he had just made with a $1 bill. But he already knew one thing with certainty. His life would never be the same after this night.
Under the same sky, the murmurs did not stop even after the chest was closed. Margaret stood motionless, the weight of the moment pressing on her chest. Half the land. In her name. The words echoed as if spoken again and again by the wind itself. She looked at Tarza Grey Hawk, really looked at him this time. "You didn't have to do that," she said quietly, her voice barely steady. "I did," he replied. There was no pride in his tone, only certainty. "Because it is right." That unsettled her more than arrogance ever could. Leaving the crowd behind, they departed before sunset. Margaret expected instructions, rules, control. Instead, Tarza mounted his horse and waited. "You may ride beside me," he said, gesturing calmly. "Or behind. Your choice." Choice. She swallowed and mounted the horse beside him. The land opened wide around them. Red earth, low brush, distant mountains cutting the horizon. The sky felt vast, almost overwhelming, as if it could swallow her fears whole. "You live on the reservation?" she asked cautiously. "Yes," Tarza answered. "Near it." They rode past the clustered dwellings she had imagined, heading instead toward the foothills. "Is this where you live?" she asked. "Yes," he said. Then added, "If you wish to live here." Her heart skipped. "If I wish." He nodded once. "I will not cage you, Margaret." The way he spoke her name, carefully, respectfully, made her chest tighten. His home. The house was modest but solid, built with skill and patience. Not grand, but strong. Inside, everything was prepared. A private room. A bed with clean linens. A chest for her belongings. "You will sleep here," Tarza said. "I will sleep in the outer room." She turned sharply. "But we are married." "Marriage without consent is not marriage," he replied evenly. No man had ever said that to her. "You owe me nothing," he continued. "Not your body. Not your obedience. Only honesty." Something cracked open inside her, something painful and frightening. "Why?" she asked. Tarza looked toward the doorway, where the mountains burned gold in the fading light. "Because my people have had enough taken from them," he said quietly. "I will not be another man who takes." The first night. Night settled softly. Margaret lay awake in the unfamiliar bed, staring at the ceiling. Outside, she could hear the low crackle of a fire. He was awake. She knew it. There was no knock. No footsteps at her door. Only silence and respect. She rose at last and opened the door. Tarza sat by the fire, carving a piece of wood with slow, practiced movements. He looked up without surprise. "You cannot sleep," he said. "No," she admitted. "Sit," he offered. She did, the warmth of the fire easing the tightness in her chest. "Are you afraid of me?" he asked directly. Margaret hesitated. "I was taught to be. And now? I'm uncertain." A faint smile touched his lips. "That is closer to the truth." A promise spoken aloud. "There is something you should know," Tarza said after a moment. "If you decide to leave, tomorrow, or any day, I will not stop you." She looked up sharply. "Even if I leave you?" Even then. They were not words of romance. They were words of dignity. For the first time in her life, Margaret felt like more than a solution to someone else's problem. Eyes upon her. Morning brought attention. Women watched her, quietly, carefully. Some curious. Some wary. Some openly disapproving. She felt it acutely. She was not merely an outsider. She was a white woman who now held Apache land. An older woman approached her at last. "Are you treated well?" she asked plainly. Margaret thought carefully before answering. "I am safe." The woman nodded once. "That is enough, for now." The first threat. That evening, a government official arrived on horseback, his expression tight. "This arrangement will cause trouble," he said coldly. "A white woman holding Apache land. That will not sit well." Tarza's face remained calm, but his eyes hardened. "The land belongs to itself." He replied, "We are only its guardians." Margaret felt it then, clear and undeniable. This marriage was not just between two people. It was a challenge. And challenges invite enemies. As the sun dipped behind the mountains, Margaret realized something else as well. Whatever she had been sent here to be, she was no longer powerless.
Her lips were cracked from cold. There was a thin, almost invisible scar that ran from the corner of her mouth down toward her jaw, silver white against the pallor. She ate slowly, carefully, as though relearning how to swallow. Dara looked away, giving her the small privacy she seemed to want. When she finished, she spoke again, still softly, but with a new note he could not quite name. "How far do you think we can go in 3 days?" He considered. "If the weather holds, we can reach the timberline camps by the 3rd evening. After that it's roads, villages, trucks, people. And if the weather does not hold," he shrugged, "then we survive. Or we don't." She looked at him a long time. "You are not afraid to die." "I'm not eager," he said, "but I've seen enough of it to know it comes whether you're afraid or not." She nodded, as though that answer satisfied something inside her. Then she asked a question that surprised him. "Do you believe in debts?" He frowned. "Debts of money?" "No, other kinds." He thought about his mother's ring still in his pocket, about the men he had not saved when avalanches came, about the dollar he had carried for 10 years like a talisman. "I believe some debts never get paid," he said finally, "and some get paid in ways nobody expects." She looked down at her hands, long, thin, still faintly blue. "Then you understand," she murmured. "Understand what?" She did not answer. Instead, she pulled her hood forward again, hiding her face once more. Dara finished his own food, drank a little snow melted in his mouth, and stood. "Come," he said. "We have maybe 3 hours of good light left." She rose without complaint. They started down the long traverse. Behind them, the 3 brothers stood silent and indifferent. Ahead of them lay miles of snow-covered ridges, frozen streams, dark pine forests, and, eventually, the world of roads and people. But between here and there was still a great deal of empty country. And something else, something Dara could feel growing in the silence between their footsteps, a sense that the real journey had very little to do with distance, and everything to do with whatever she carried beneath that black cloak, and whatever she intended to do when they finally reached the place where she would tell him to stop.
The weight of names. Margaret did not sleep easily that night. The words of the government official echoed in her mind like a warning bell. This arrangement will cause trouble. She had crossed an ocean of expectations to arrive here, and now she stood at the center of something far larger than herself. Land, power, identity, and a marriage that neither side of the world fully understood. Morning among strangers. At dawn, the land awakened gently. Margaret stepped outside, drawn by the cool air and the pale pink sky stretching endlessly above the mountains. The earth smelled different here, dry, honest, unashamed of itself. She wrapped her shawl tighter as footsteps approached. Tarza stopped several paces away, giving her space as always. "Did you sleep?" he asked. "A little," she answered truthfully. "Enough to think." He nodded. Thinking can be heavier than labor. She surprised herself by smiling, learning the unspoken rules. As the morning passed, Margaret began to notice things she had missed before. No one spoke loudly around Tarza, not out of fear, but respect. Decisions were not announced, they were discussed. Elders gathered beneath the shade of a large mesquite tree, speaking in low tones. Tarza listened more than he spoke. She watched him carefully. He was not a ruler. He was a bridge. A young woman approached Margaret cautiously, offering her a bowl of water. "Thank you," Margaret said, unsure if the gesture would be understood. The woman hesitated, then nodded and smiled faintly. It was small, but it mattered, the name she carried. Later that afternoon, an elder requested Margaret's presence. She entered the shaded circle with a racing heart. The elder's eyes were sharp, assessing. "You carry many names," he said slowly. "Daughter, wife, white woman, owner of land." Margaret felt the weight of each word. "I did not ask for the land," she said carefully, "but I will not misuse it." The elder studied her for a long moment. "Land remembers how it is treated," he sighed. He said, "So do people." She nodded, understanding more than the words themselves conveyed. A secret from the past. That evening, as the sun sank low, Margaret finally spoke the truth she had carried like a stone in a chest. "I was not chosen because I was wanted," she said softly to Taza. "I was sent because I was unwanted." He looked at her, listening. "My uncle needed me gone. I was inconvenient." Taza's jaw tightened, not in anger, but restraint. "You were used," he said. "Yes." He met her gaze steadily. "Here, you will decide who you are." For the first time, Margaret believed it might be possible. Trouble takes shape. The sound of approaching horses cut through the calm. 2 men arrived, settlers from the nearby town. Their eyes moved from Taza to Margaret, lingering too long. "So this is her," one of them muttered. "The girl who owns Apache land." Margaret felt a chill. "This land is not for sale," Taza said firmly. One of the men smirked. "Everything has a price." Taza stepped forward, calm, immovable. "Not this." The men left, but not without promise in their eyes. Promise of return. Promise of conflict. A choice begins. That night, Margaret stood outside again, staring at the stars scattered like secrets across the sky. She had been sent here as a solution, a transaction, a mistake. But now she understood something clearly. She could leave. Taza had given her that freedom. Yet for the first time in her life, staying felt like a choice, not a sentence. And choices, she was learning, were powerful things.
Their lower branches heavy with snow. The ground beneath them was dark and needle-covered, easier to walk on, harder to leave clear footprints. Dara led them deeper in, weaving between trunks, trying to break line of sight. After perhaps 15 minutes, he found what he was looking for, a small overhang of rock with a shallow cave beneath it, barely deep enough for 2 people to sit side by side. A thick curtain of snow-laden spruce branches hung in front of it, almost hiding the opening completely. He motioned her inside. She slipped in without hesitation. He followed, crouching low, then carefully arranged the branches behind them so the entrance looked untouched from outside. They sat in near total darkness. Only the faintest blue light filtered through the needles. Neither spoke for a long time. Eventually, Dara whispered, "How many are there?" She took so long to answer, he thought she might not. Then, barely audible, "One. One man." "No." He waited. She added even more quietly, "One that was once more than one." Dara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. He had heard fragments of stories, half-drunk hunters mumbling about the echo people or the ones who walk after. Old tales of miners trapped in a collapse 100 years ago, or soldiers lost in a blizzard, or entire families wiped out by avalanche who never quite left the mountain. He had always dismissed them as grief dressed up as folklore. Now he wasn't so sure. The tapping sound returned. Closer. This time it came from almost directly above them, on the rock shelf that formed the roof of their little shelter. Top, 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 top. Slow. Then quicker. Then slow again, like someone trying to decide. Dara shifted his grip on the bow. An arrow was already knocked. The woman suddenly reached out and laid her hand lightly on his forearm. He froze. Her fingers were ice cold, even through his sleeve. "Don't," she breathed. "Why not?" "Because it wants you to see it." Dara stared at the dark shape of her hood in the gloom. "And if I don't, then it waits longer." He exhaled through his nose. "How long?" "Until you look," she said simply. The tapping stopped. Complete silence fell, thick, unnatural silence. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Minutes passed. Then, very softly, from somewhere just outside the curtain of branches, A voice. Not loud. Not angry. Almost gentle. A single word. A dollar. Dara felt his stomach drop. The woman's hand tightened on his arm, hard enough to hurt. The voice spoke again, still soft, still calm, still impossibly close. You paid $1. Dara's pulse hammered in his ears. He had not told anyone about the dollar. Not a living soul. The woman leaned in until her mouth was almost against his ear. When I tell you, she whispered, do not look back. No matter what you hear. No matter what it says. Promise me. Dara swallowed. Then, very quietly, he answered, I promise. Outside the branches, something moved. Slow footsteps in the snow. Coming closer.
Shadows on the horizon. The night was unusually still, almost as if the desert itself was holding its breath. Margaret felt it too, a tension in the air that spoke of trouble. She had been learning the rhythms of this land, the quiet ways it communicated danger, and tonight, every instinct whispered, something was coming. She stepped outside the house, her shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders. The stars above were bright, yet they offered no comfort. Taza was already there, sitting near the fire, sharpening a spear. He looked up at her but said nothing, letting her come into the silence on her own terms. Something's not right, Margaret whispered. Taza's eyes narrowed slightly. You feel it too, he said. Good. Trust your senses. The arrival of threat. Before dawn, the sound of horses echoed across the foothills. Margaret's heart jumped. 2 men, settlers from the nearby town, rode toward the house, their intent clear in their posture. They were not visitors, not curious travelers. They were looking for a confrontation. Taza stepped between Margaret and the intruders, his figure calm but formidable. Leave, he said, his voice low and steady. Now. The taller of the 2 men sneered. We are not leaving. That land belongs to us, her or not. Margaret's breath caught. She had seen hostility before, but never this close, never directed at her. Taza's hand rested lightly on the hilt of a knife. I warned you. The men exchanged glances and then, with a muttered curse, retreated, but their eyes promised they would return. Margaret exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of the reality she had entered. Lessons in defense. That day, Taza began teaching Margaret about the land, about the ways of the Apache, about survival. She learned quickly. How to ride across rocky terrain. How to read the tracks of animals and humans alike. How to move silently and observe without being seen. Each lesson carried a subtle truth, her safety, and the safety of the land she now partially owned. Depended not only on Taza but also on her own courage. By evening, Margaret realized something remarkable. She was no longer just a bride, a passive figure. She was a participant in her own story, facing threats, making choices, and testing her strength. Trust and tensions. Despite the growing bond, tension lingered. I don't know if I can do this, she admitted one night, sitting by the fire. Taza looked at her steadily. You can, he said. You already are. You are stronger than you think. Margaret felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. For the first time, she believed it. But there was still uncertainty. Outside forces were closing in. The settlers would return, and with them, danger she could not yet fully imagine. The first real test. 2 days later, the threat came again, but this time, with more than words. As Margaret was walking near the edge of the property, she saw them, 3 men on horseback, approaching fast, weapons ready. They shouted insults, trying to provoke a reaction. Taza appeared beside her, his presence calm but unyielding. Do not run, he said. Stand. Show them we are not afraid. Margaret's pulse raced. For a moment, she considered fleeing. Then she looked at Taza, at the land he had sworn to protect, at the chest he had given her, and something shifted. She planted her feet, squared her shoulders, and met the men's gaze. For the first time, she realized that being chosen, being given power, meant responsibility. And she was ready to claim it. A bond solidifying. Later that night, after the men had retreated, Margaret and Taza sat together in silence. You did well today, he said quietly. I couldn't have done it without you, she replied. No, he corrected gently. You did it yourself. I guided you, yes. But it was you who stood. You who faced them. For the first time, Margaret felt the full weight of what he had given her. Trust, respect, freedom, and the chance to become more than she had ever imagined. But she also knew. The dangers were far from over. The settlers would come again, and next time, the stakes would be higher. And somewhere in the shadows, another challenge awaited, one that would test not just her courage, but the fragile bond growing between her and Taza.
After so much silence, what was that? She took a long time to answer. When she did, her words were careful. Something that used to be part of me. Dara waited for more. More did not come. Instead, she asked a question of her own. Do you still have $1? He almost laughed, short, bitter. You took it. Night before last. In the cabin. She shook her head slowly. I took the paper with a number 1 on it. But the promise that came with it, that stayed with you. Dara stared at her shadowed face. He suddenly understood something he did not want to understand. The $1 wasn't payment for you to leave the valley, he said slowly. She did not deny it. It was payment, she whispered, so you would not look back when the time came. Outside, the wind picked up again, clean, ordinary cold. But inside Dara's chest, something heavy had settled. Something that felt like the beginning of a very long debt. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he stood. We keep moving, he said. Dawn is in a few hours. We'll reach the lower forest by then. She rose without protest. They stepped out from under the overhang. The snow outside was smooth, perfectly smooth. No footprints except the 2 trails they had made coming in. Whatever had stood there had left no mark at all. They started walking again. Downward. Always downward. And behind them, though Dara kept his promise and never once looked back, something followed. Not close. Not loud. But it was there. Patient. Remembering. Waiting for the next time someone would speak the word $1 in the dark.
Trials of fire. The sun rose red and sharp over the Arizona horizon, casting long shadows across the rugged land. Margaret stood on the ridge, watching the settlers' trail from yesterday disappear into the distance. The memory of their hostility lingered like a storm cloud she could not shake. Taza approached silently, as he always did, his calm presence grounding her. They will return, he said simply. Margaret nodded. And we must be ready. Lessons in strategy. That morning, Taza began teaching her more than survival. He taught her strategy. How a person stands, he said, is not just for themselves, but for those they protect. He showed her how to anticipate movement, how to read the signs of approaching danger long before it arrives. Margaret absorbed it all, her mind racing with possibilities and contingencies. For the first time, she realized that land, like life, is a battlefield, and she would need courage, wit, and strength to survive it. An unexpected bond. Days turned into weeks. The more time Margaret spent with Taza, the more she understood him, not just as a protector or a husband in name, but as a man of principle, vision, and unwavering honor. One evening, as they sat by the fire, she spoke. I never expected any of this, she said. Not the land, not you, not even myself. Taza smiled faintly, never taking his eyes from the flames. You were sent here, he said softly, but it was not to be owned or commanded. You were sent to choose. Margaret felt something inside her shift. Fear was still present, but it was now tempered with determination. She was no longer just a bride in someone else's story. She was beginning to author her own. A new thread emerges. The peace was short-lived. One afternoon, a messenger arrived from the nearby town. His message was brief, but it carried weight heavier than any physical weapon. The settlers have organized. They intend to claim your land by force. Margaret's stomach tightened. This was no longer a verbal threat. They were planning action. Taza's expression darkened. They will not succeed, he said, his voice steady, yet his jaw was tight. But we must prepare. Margaret felt a surge of resolve. She could no longer remain passive. Every lesson Taza had taught her was about to be tested. Training in firelight. Over the next few days, Taza trained Margaret in ways she had never imagined. Not just survival, but leadership, observation, strategy, decisiveness. He put her in situations where hesitation could mean failure. She stumbled at first, but each misstep became a lesson. And with every lesson, her confidence grew. I am not who I was, she admitted one night. I am stronger. Taza studied her, the firelight casting shadows across his face. Yes, he said. And you will need that strength soon. The men coming are not merely greedy, they are desperate. A stirring of feelings. Even as tension mounted, Margaret found herself noticing the little things. The way Tarza's eyes softened when he spoke to her. The way he never assumed obedience, only trust. The careful respect in every gesture, every word. She had not expected to feel anything beyond fear and obligation. But now, the faint beginnings of admiration, and something deeper, breathed quietly within her. It scared her almost as much as the approaching threat. A test of will. One evening, Tarza handed her a folded map. "This is your land, in every way that matters," he said. "Tomorrow, you will decide how to confront them." Margaret looked down at the lines, the ridges, the streams, and hills she had come to know. For the first time, she understood fully what it meant to be chosen, not by someone else, but by circumstance, by fate, by courage. And she was ready.
The sapphire ring, the folded map. She lifted the map and unfolded it carefully. The paper was old, foxed at the edges, stained brown in places. The ink had faded to a rusty color, but the lines were still sharp. It showed this very valley. A thin, winding path had been drawn in red, starting from Black Hollow, passing the three brothers, crossing the stream they had just forded, and ending exactly here at the stone. A single small cross was marked beside the stone. She touched the cross with one fingertip. "This is where I was supposed to stop." Dara looked from the map to her face, still mostly hidden. "Supposed to stop?" She nodded, but I kept walking. He felt the weight of the words settle between them. "How long ago?" She closed her eyes for a moment. "A very long winter." He looked at the stone again. The hollow in its face seemed deeper now, as though it had opened a little while they spoke. "Who drew this map?" She folded the paper again and returned it to the box. "Someone who thought he could buy time." "With what?" "With me." Dara felt the hairs on his arms rise again. "You're saying someone paid to keep you walking?" "Not keep me walking," she corrected softly. "Keep me from stopping." He stared at her. She met his gaze, or at least he felt her meet it beneath the hood. "The dollar you gave me," she said, "was the first honest coin in many, many winters. Everything before that was borrowed time, stolen time, coins taken from dead hands, promises made to things that do not forgive." Dara's mouth fell dry. "And now the borrowed time is running out." She looked toward the stone. "If I stop here, it ends. Everything ends. For me, for the thing that follows, for anyone who ever touched the chain of debts that started long before you were born." She paused. "But if I keep walking, it follows. And it grows hungrier. And one day it will not ask anymore. It will simply take." Dara looked back the way they had come. The forest was empty. No movement. No sound. But he knew it was there, somewhere just beyond sight, just beyond sound, remembering every step, every word, every coin. He turned to her again. "You want me to decide?" She shook her head slowly. "No, I want you to keep the promise you already made." He remembered her words from the night before. "When I tell you to stop, you stop. And whatever happens, you do not look back." He looked down at the ground between them. There was no visible line, no mark in the snow, but he felt it anyway, a boundary thinner than breath. He lifted his eyes to hers. "How far do you want to go?" She answered without hesitation. "Until there is nowhere left to run." Dara exhaled through his nose, a short, tired sound. Then he stepped past the stone, past the cross on the map, past the place where she was supposed to have stopped. He did not look back to see if she followed. He already knew she would. Behind them, very faintly, almost too faint to hear, came the sound again. Talp, talp? Not angry, not impatient, just persistent, like someone counting down the last few grains of sand in a very old hourglass.
The first confrontation. Dawn had barely broken when the sound of hooves shook the quiet of the foothills. Margaret was already awake, standing by the edge of the plateau, scanning the horizon. "They're coming," she whispered, almost to herself. Tarza Grey Hawk appeared silently beside her, his presence steady as the mountains. "Yes, they are," he said. "Are you ready?" Margaret's stomach tightened, but she nodded. She had trained, learned, and grown. Fear still existed, but it was tempered by determination. Facing the settlers. The settlers arrived in a small group, their horses kicking up dust as they rode aggressively toward the property. Weapons were drawn, and the leader sneered at Margaret and Taza. "You think a girl and a few men can stop us?" he spat. "This land belongs to us, whether she owns it or not." Taza did not flinch. "It belongs to itself," he said firmly. "We are only its guardians." Margaret's pulse raced. She could feel the power of the land beneath her feet, the same land she had begun to love, and a surge of courage pushed through her chest. Margaret's first decision. Taza turned to her. "This is your moment. You decide what to do." Margaret took a deep breath. She remembered all of Taza's lessons: observation, strategy, patience. She knew that rash action could destroy them, but hesitation could invite disaster. She stepped forward, raising her voice so the settlers could hear. "This land is not yours to take. Leave now, or face the consequences." The settlers laughed mockingly, but Margaret noticed a flicker of doubt in their eyes. She had never commanded anyone before, yet somehow, her words carried authority. The clash. The men did not leave. They tried to circle the property, attempting to intimidate Taza and Margaret into submission. Taza moved silently, positioning himself and Margaret strategically. With every approach of the settlers, Margaret anticipated their moves. She called out, guided, and even acted to block their paths. Taza watched.
Dara walked into the ruined shelter. He kicked snow away from a flat stone near the stove and sat down heavily. His legs were grateful for the rest, even if his mind was not. She remained standing just outside the broken wall, half in, half out. After a while, he asked the question that had been growing inside him since the frozen stream. "What happens if you stop walking?" She looked down at her own hands. Everything that was borrowed gets called back, meaning the debts return to their owners. All at once, all the way back. Dara rubbed the side of his face. The stubble was rough under his glove. "So every coin you ever took, every promise you ever made someone else keep, comes due?" She nodded once. "And the thing that follows? It is the collector, not cruel, not kind, just inevitable." He stared at the rusted stove for a while. Then he asked something quieter. "How did you start collecting?" She took a small breath. "I didn't start collecting. I started owing." She stepped fully into the shelter now. For the first time, she sat on the broken wall opposite him, knees drawn up, arms wrapped around them. "I was young," she said. "Younger than most people ever believe when I tell them. There was a winter so bad the wolves came into the houses. My family died, one by one. First my little brother, then my mother, then my father. I was the last." She paused, long enough that Dara thought she might not continue. "I was 12, maybe 13. I walked down to the valley alone. No food, no cold, just anger and cold and the certainty that I was going to die soon." She looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time without the hood fully hiding her eyes. "On the third night, I met a man. He had a fire. He had food. He had a coat he said I could borrow. He said he would take me to the next village. He said all I had to do was promise him one small thing." Dara waited. "He asked me to carry something for him. A single coin. He said if I carried it until spring, he would forgive every debt my family ever owed him. I didn't even know we had debts. But I was starving. So I said yes." She opened her hand. In her palm lay the same gold coin she had shown him the first night. It looked older now, older than it had any right to look. "I carried it. Spring came. The man never returned. But the coin stayed warm, even when everything else froze." She closed her fingers around it. After that, others came, one after another, each with a coin, each with a promise, each asking me to carry just a little longer, just until the next season, just until the next winter passed, just until they could pay what they owed. Her voice grew quieter. "I never meant to become what I became. But every time I accepted a coin, something else accepted me. Something older. Something that had been waiting a very long time for someone foolish enough to keep walking with other people's debts." Dara looked at the coin in her hand. "And now the chain is very long and very heavy, and the collector is tired of waiting." She looked toward the trees behind them. "It has never come this close before. Not in all these winters." Dara rubbed his thumb over the worn leather of his staff. "Because of the dollar." She nodded. The dollar was different. It was clean. No blood on it. No lies wrapped around it. No one had died to give it weight. When you handed it over, you weren't buying anything. You were just giving. She looked at him again, searching. That small, honest act broke something. Not everything, but enough. Now the collector is confused. It doesn't know whether to take me back or to take the one who paid with something real. Dara gave a short, tired laugh. So, I'm either saving you, or I just painted a target on my own back. She did not smile. Both. A long silence followed. Outside the shelter, the wind moved through the larches, soft, almost musical. Then Dara asked the most dangerous question of all. Do you want to stop? She looked down at the gold coin for a very long time. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I don't know how to want anything anymore. Wanting was taken from me a long time ago. All that's left is momentum. She lifted her eyes to his. But if I had to choose, I would choose to walk one more day. Just one. With someone who isn't afraid to look at me and still see a person. Dara felt something shift inside his chest, something small but permanent. He stood up slowly. Then we walk one more day. He offered her his hand. This time she took it. Her fingers were still cold, colder than any living hand should be. But they were solid, real. They stepped out of the ruined shelter together. Behind them the wind kept moving through the trees. Somewhere farther back, still out of sight, still patient, the soft tapping resumed. Talp, talp? Not faster, not slower, just the same unhurried rhythm. Counting one more day.
Secrets and storms. The sun had barely risen over the desert when Margaret woke to the distant sound of hooves once again. But this time, the tension was heavier, the air thick with anticipation. She dressed quickly, her hands trembling with adrenaline. Taza was already outside, standing tall and silent, his eyes scanning the horizon. They're back, he said calmly. And this time, they bring more than words. Margaret swallowed hard. She had grown stronger in the last days, but fear still lurked in the shadows of her mind. The second attack. By mid-morning, a larger group of settlers arrived, riding aggressively toward their land. Some carried guns. Others wielded clubs and ropes. Their intentions were unmistakable. They intended to take the land by force. Margaret's heart pounded. She looked at Taza. Stay close, he said softly. And remember what I taught you. Your mind is your strongest weapon. Margaret nodded, clutching the rifle Taza had lent her. She had never fired a gun before, but the desert and her circumstances had taught her to adapt quickly. Strategy in action. Taza and Margaret moved together, positioning themselves on higher ground. Margaret noticed every movement, every approach, anticipating the settlers' actions. Now, Taza whispered, use your voice first. Margaret stepped forward, shouting commands and warnings. Her presence carried authority, startling the men who had assumed a timid young bride would cower. They hesitated, then tried a flanking maneuver. Margaret anticipated it and signaled Taza. Within moments, the settlers were forced to retreat again, this time with bruised pride and shaken confidence. Margaret felt a surge of exhilaration. She had fought. She had won, not just with weapons, but with presence, wit, and courage. Taza's secret revealed. That evening, as the sun sank behind the mountains, Taza finally opened up. There is something you must know about me, he said quietly, his eyes distant. Before you arrived, I had enemies. Ones who would not hesitate to destroy anyone close to me. The land you now share was once my shield, my refuge, my home. But it was also a target. And the settlers, they are not the only danger. Margaret listened, sensing the weight in his voice. You've seen me calm, he continued, but I have fought and survived battles you cannot imagine. And some of my choices, secrets I carry, may test your trust, Margaret. Her chest tightened. What kind of secrets? Taza looked at her steadily. Secrets of blood, loyalty, and old debts. Ones that could cost us everything if revealed at the wrong moment. Margaret swallowed. Fear and curiosity mingled in her chest. She realized that surviving the settlers was only the first test. There were other storms ahead, ones born from the past. A growing bond. Despite the tension, a fragile trust had formed between them. Margaret felt it, cautiously, like sunlight after a storm. You've changed, Taza said quietly. You are no longer just a bride. You are part of this land, part of its people, part of me. Margaret looked at him, uncertainty and admiration mixing in her gaze. I am learning, she admitted. And that learning will be crucial, he said. For what is coming next, you will need all your strength, all your courage, and all your mind. The calm before the storm. Night fell. The desert was quiet, deceptive in its serenity. Margaret lay awake, thinking of the day's events. She had faced danger. She had fought. She had proven herself. But deep down, she knew the challenges were far from over. The settler's hatred would not vanish, and Tarza's secrets, those shadows he carried, loomed over her, waiting for the right moment to emerge. And somewhere in the distance, beyond the hills, forces were gathering, forces that would push both of them to the brink. Margaret realized survival would demand more than courage. It would demand trust, faith, and the kind of love that could withstand secrets, threats, and the weight of destiny.
As they drew closer to the smoke, details appeared. A cluster of low log cabins, 6 or 7, arranged in a loose half-circle. A larger building in the center, probably a communal hall or trading post. A few sleds leaned against walls. A stack of split wood under a lean-to roof. 2 dogs lying near a doorway lifted their heads and watched them approach. No one came out to meet them. That was the first strange thing. Normally in these high camps, strangers were greeted, warily, but greeted. A hand raised. A question shouted. A rifle shone, but not pointed. Here, nothing. Only the smoke rising, steady and thin. Dara slowed. He felt the woman slow behind him. Something's wrong, he said low. Yes. They kept walking, but more carefully now. When they were perhaps 50 meters from the nearest cabin, one of the dogs stood up. It did not bark. It just stared, ears forward, tail stiff. Then both dogs rose and backed away slowly, tails low, until they disappeared behind the corner of the hall. Dara stopped. He unslung his bow, not drawing yet, just holding it ready. The door of the central building opened. A man stepped out, tall, bearded, heavy winter coat, rifle in his hands, not pointed, but very clearly ready. He looked at Dara for a long time. Then his eyes moved past Dara, to the woman standing behind him. The man's face changed. Not fear exactly, something closer to recognition. He spoke, voice rough, loud enough to carry across the snow. You shouldn't have brought her here. Dara answered calmly. We're just passing through, looking for shelter for one night. Food if you can spare it. The man shook his head slowly. She can't come in. Dara felt the woman take one small step closer to his back. Why not? He asked. The man's eyes never left her. Because last time she passed through, 6 people didn't wake up the next morning. A long silence. Dara felt the cold go deeper than it had all day. He spoke without turning. Is that true? Behind him, her voice was very soft. Part of it is. The man with the rifle took one step forward. Turn around. Go back the way you came. Or go around. But she doesn't step foot inside any building here. Dara looked at the cabins. All the windows were dark. No movement. No fusses. Only smoke. Only silence. He looked back at the man. If we don't stop here, we may not make it to the next place. The man's mouth tightened. Then you shouldn't have brought her. Dara felt something shift in the air behind him. Not wind. Not sound. Just pressure. Like the moment before a storm breaks. He made his voice very steady. One night. Outside. We'll use your wood pile. We'll build our own fire. We won't ask to come inside. The man stared at the woman for another long moment. Then he spat into the snow. Build your fire over there. He pointed toward a flat area near the edge of the camp, well away from the buildings. Use what would you want. But if anything happens tonight, if anyone hears anything, we come out shooting. Dara nodded once. Fair. The man looked at the woman one last time. Then he turned and went back inside. The door closed with a dull sound. Dara stood still for a few seconds. Then he looked over his shoulder. She was watching the closed door. You've been here before, he said. Yes. And what he said, 6 people died. But not because I wanted them to. Dara exhaled slowly. Then why? She answered so quietly he almost missed it. Because someone else wanted more time. And they tried to pay for it with me. She looked up at him. They failed. Dara looked at the dark windows, the silent camp, the thin smoke. Then he looked at her. Let's build that fire. They walked to the spot the man had pointed out. They gathered wood in silence. They built a small, careful fire. They sat close to it, close enough to feel heat on their faces. But the warmth did not seem to reach very deep. And all through the long, cold night that followed, the camp stayed silent. The dogs never barked again. And somewhere just beyond the edge of the firelight, something waited, not tapping this time, but listening, very carefully, very patiently, for the moment when someone would finally speak the wrong word, or look the wrong way, or offer one more coin that was never truly clean.
The siege of the land. The morning sun was pale and harsh, casting long shadows across the rugged hills. Margaret stood at the edge of the property, scanning the horizon. Her heart beat fast, but there was no fear, only determination.
Moment when someone would finally speak the wrong word, or look the wrong way, or offer one more coin that was never truly clean.
The siege of the land. The morning sun was pale and harsh, casting long shadows across the rugged hills. Margaret stood at the edge of the property, scanning the horizon. Her heart beat fast, but there was no fear, only determination. Taza approached silently, his face calm but resolute. "They've returned," he said quietly. "This time, they bring everything they've gathered." Margaret nodded. She had prepared, learned, and grown stronger. Today, the stakes were higher than ever. The settlers' attack. By midday, a larger group of settlers appeared, riding aggressively toward the land. Guns, ropes, and crude weapons glinted in the sunlight. Their leader, a tall man with a cruel grin, shouted insults, hoping to provoke a reaction. Taza moved in front of Margaret, his presence commanding. "This is your land," he said firmly, "and you will not take it." Margaret felt a surge of power. She lifted the rifle Taza had given her, her hand steady. The lesson she had learned, the strategy, observation, patience, guided every movement. A battle of wits and courage. The settlers attempted to flank them, but Margaret anticipated their moves. She signaled Taza, and together they countered every maneuver. Margaret's voice carried commands. Her presence instilled doubt in their attackers. Shots were fired, dust and dirt rose, and the sound of hooves thundered across the land. Margaret realized that this was not just survival. It was claiming a place in a world that had once sought to control her. When the dust settled, the settlers retreated, bruised, humiliated, but not defeated. The cost of victory. Later, Margaret and Taza sat by the fire, silent. The night was quiet now, the land itself seeming to exhale. "You did well today," Taza said softly. "Better than I expected." Margaret began, then stopped. Words failed her. She had faced danger, led, and fought alongside him. She had learned to trust herself, to trust him. Taza studied her, his dark eyes revealing something unspoken. "You are no longer just a bride. You are part of this land. Part of me. Part of what we protect." Margaret felt warmth in her chest, a fragile, tentative trust growing into something stronger. The revelation of the past. That night, Taza finally shared the secret he had hinted at before. "There is something you must know," he said quietly, the firelight casting shadows across his face. "Before you came, I faced enemies that sought to destroy me and this land. My father's enemies, old debts of blood and honor, have followed me here. Some of them are among the settlers. They will not stop until they have taken everything." Margaret listened, realizing the weight of what he carried. The danger was far larger than she had imagined. "Then we fight together," she said firmly. "All of it. Every threat. Every secret. I won't back down." Taza's gaze softened. "I knew you would say that," he said. A bond forged in fire. Outside, the wind swept across the desert. Inside, the fire crackled, illuminating two figures who had faced fear, danger, and uncertainty, and emerged stronger. Margaret had arrived as a bride, forced into a life she did not choose. Now, she was a partner, a defender, a woman who had found courage she never knew existed. And as Taza placed a protective hand over hers, she realized that the greatest gift of all had nothing to do with land, contracts, or survival. It was trust, respect, and the beginning of a bond that could withstand storms yet to come. The calm before the next storm. They did not yet know what the future held. The settlers would return. Old enemies lingered in the shadows. Secrets could unravel at any moment. But for now, under the wide Arizona sky, Margaret and Taza allowed themselves a moment of peace. a moment to acknowledge that together they could face anything. The land stretched endlessly before them, and for the first time, Margaret felt that it was truly hers, not because it was given, but because she had fought, endured, and chosen to.
Her eyes were fixed on the fire. "They're awake," she whispered. "Who?" "Everyone inside. They've been awake since we arrived." Dara felt the skin along his spine tighten. "They didn't come out." "They never do," she said. "Not when I'm here. They wait. They listen. They hope it passes them by." Another sound now, faint, muffled voices behind the walls. Not shouting, not panicked, just low, urgent murmuring, words too soft to make out. Then one voice rose slightly. Older, female, trembling but clear. "Don't look out the windows." The sentence died quickly, as though someone had clapped a hand over the speaker's mouth. Dara leaned forward slightly. "How long will they stay inside?" "Until dawn," she said. "Or until it decides they're no longer worth ignoring." He looked toward the cabins. All windows still dark. No faces, no lantern light, but he could feel eyes on them. Dozens of eyes, watching from behind shutters and cracks and drawn curtains, waiting to see whether the thing circling would settle for the two people sitting by the fire, or whether it would grow bored and look for easier doors to open. The fire popped loudly, unnaturally loud. A single coal jumped free and landed in the snow a few feet away. It hissed, glowed for a second, then died. In that brief moment of extra light, Dara saw it. Just at the very edge of vision, beyond the farthest cabin, half hidden behind a stack of sleds. A tall shape, thinner than before, longer, the rags hanging looser, as though the body beneath them had stretched during the night. It stood motionless, head tilted, looking straight at them. No eyes, just hollows. The fire dimmed again. The shape was gone, but the pressure in the air remained. Heavier now, closer. The woman spoke, barely audible. "It's trying to decide." Decide what? Whether tonight is the night it collects, or the night it waits for a better offer. Dara's fingers tightened around the bow. "What kind of offer?" "Any kind," she said. "A promise. A coin. A name. A memory. Anything that still carries weight." She turned her head toward him. For the first time since they met, her hood slipped back completely. Moonlight and firelight met on her face. She looked younger than he expected, and older at the same time. Exhausted, fragile, and strangely calm. "If it speaks to you tonight," she said, "don't answer. Not even to refuse. Silence is the only thing it can't use." Dara nodded once. Then he asked the question he had avoided until now. "And if it speaks to you?" She looked back into the fire. "Then I answer." "Why?" "Because I've answered every time before. And every time I answer, it buys a little more time. For me. For it. For the chain." She paused. But tonight, she didn't finish. She didn't need to. Tonight the chain felt very close to breaking. Or tightening forever. The circling sounds resumed, slower now. More deliberate. The night stretched on. The fire burned lower. And somewhere in the darkness, just beyond the camp, something waited. For one of them to finally speak first.
The final confrontation. The desert sun rose harsh and unrelenting, casting long shadows across the rocky land. Margaret stood beside Taza, feeling the tension in every rustle of the wind, every distant bird call. Today, there would be no mistakes. "They are coming," Taza said quietly, his voice calm but sharp. "This is the last challenge. We cannot falter." Margaret nodded, her hand brushing the rifle at her side. Her courage had grown through weeks of danger, strategy, and survival. Today, it would be tested like never before. The settlers' last stand. By midday, a large contingent of settlers appeared, riding aggressively across the plateau. Their leader, the same cruel man from before, spurred his horse forward, sneering. "This ends today," he shouted. "Your land, your woman, everything is ours." Margaret felt a chill, but Taza's hand on her shoulder steadied her. "Remember your training. Observe. Decide. Act." She breathed deeply, scanning the attackers, anticipating their every move. For the first time, she truly felt the unity of mind and body, of thought and action. A test of trust. Taza stepped forward to negotiate, knowing the settlers would not be swayed easily. Margaret remained behind, observing, ready to act. Suddenly, one of the men charged toward her. Margaret did not panic. She raised her rifle and fired a warning shot that echoed across the hills. The man froze, then stumbled back. Tarza's eyes met hers. There was no surprise, only trust. She realized then that this bond, forged in danger and respect, was unbreakable, the turning point. The settlers, seeing Margaret's resolve and Tarza's calm strategy, began to hesitate. They had underestimated her. They had assumed fear, weakness, and submission, but Margaret had none to give. She stepped forward, voice firm and commanding. "Leave this land. You have no claim here. Return home, or face the consequences." For a moment, silence fell. The wind carried her words, the land itself seeming to support her. The settlers, disheartened and intimidated, finally turned their horses and fled, muttering threats that were hollow in the face of her courage. The gift revealed. After the danger passed, Tarza took Margaret by the hand and led her to the carved chest, the same chest he had given her at the wedding. "You have earned more than land," he said softly. He opened it, revealing additional deeds and legal papers. "This gift is not just land or property. It is recognition of your courage, your strength, and the trust we share. You are no longer merely a bride. You are my partner in all things." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. She realized that the true gift was not material. It was respect, equality, and the chance to define her own life. A new beginning. That night, under the vast Arizona sky, Margaret and Tarza sat beside the fire. The stars stretched endlessly above them, as if promising infinite possibilities. "I never imagined I could be this strong," Margaret whispered. "You were always capable," Tarza replied. "You just needed the chance to see it yourself." Margaret smiled faintly, realizing that she had found not only safety but purpose, trust, and a bond deeper than she had ever known. The settlers' threat was gone, for now, but Margaret understood that life in the West was a constant test of courage and choice. And for the first time, she felt ready to face it, not as a frightened girl, but as a woman who had claimed her life, her land, and her destiny.
I would rather keep walking with someone who gave me something that wasn't borrowed. The fire popped again, ordinary this time. The thing stood motionless for several long heartbeats. Then it lowered its hand. The pale coin vanished, whether into the rags or into nothing, Dara could not tell. Then the chain continues. It took one step backward, not retreating, just creating distance. But chains can tighten, and links can break. It turned, slowly, until it faced the dark forest beyond the camp. "One more day," it said. "Perhaps two. Then I will not ask again." It took another step, and another. The shadows swallowed it. The pressure in the air eased. The fire returned to normal, small, red, unremarkable. Dara exhaled for what felt like the first time in hours. He looked at her. Her hood had fallen back completely again. Her face was pale, exhausted calm. A single tear, clear, ordinary, had tracked down her cheek and frozen halfway to her jaw. She did not wipe it away. Instead, she looked at him. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For staying quiet." He gave a small shrug. "I didn't know what to say. That's why it worked." They sat in silence for a while longer. The sky began to lighten in the east. False dawn, thin and gray. The cabins behind them remained dark. No doors opened. No voices. But Dara knew they had heard everything. They had seen everything. And tomorrow, when the camp woke, they would look at him and at her with the kind of eyes people use when they have witnessed something they will never speak about. Dara stood up slowly. He offered her his hand again. She took it. This time her fingers were not quite as cold. They began walking again, away from the camp, away from the dying fire, down the long slope that would eventually lead to roads, villages, and the wider world. Behind them the snow lay smooth and untouched. No footprints, no marks. But far back beyond hearing, beyond sight, something walked. Still patient, still remembering. Only now it no longer asked. It measured, and it waited for the moment when...
The gift of freedom. The dawn broke over the horizon with a golden fire, painting the rugged cliffs and the red desert soil in hues of promise and renewal. Margaret awoke to the sound of the wind rustling through the sagebrush, and for the first time in months, she felt a calm that wasn't burdened by fear or uncertainty. The settlers had been repelled, their threats dispersed by courage, strategy, and sheer will. Yet, The real challenge, the one that would define her and Tarza's future, was about to unfold. She stepped outside, feeling the earth beneath her boots, solid and familiar. It no longer felt alien. The land had begun to recognize her as one of its own, and in return, she embraced it fully, understanding its rhythms, its secrets, and its silent strength. Tarza emerged from the small house, his expression serene but imbued with gravity. He approached Margaret slowly, as if measuring the moment before speaking. "Today is different," he said quietly. "Not because the settlers are gone, they may return, but because today you will understand the full meaning of what I gave you on our wedding day." Margaret tilted her head, her curiosity piqued. She remembered the chest he had presented to her, the one that had seemed a simple gesture at first. But now she sensed that the true gift was something far greater than she had imagined. The gathering. By mid-morning, the Apache elders gathered at the Centra Mesa, their faces etched with wisdom and centuries of history. Tarza led Margaret to the center, and all eyes turned to her. She felt a flicker of nervousness but recalled all she had learned: patience, respect, observation, and courage. "You have faced danger," one elder began, his voice deep and resonant, "and you have stood beside our people, not as a stranger, but as a guardian." Margaret listened intently, her heart swelling. She understood now that her journey had not been merely about surviving, but about earning trust and recognition. Then Tarza spoke. Margaret has proven her strength and loyalty. Today, she receives a gift, not of wealth, not of land alone, but of freedom, respect, and choice. She is no longer bound by obligation, only by the bond we share. Whispers traveled through the crowd. Margaret realized that the entire community understood the significance of the moment. The true gift. Tarza led Margaret to the chest once more. He opened it slowly, revealing a bundle of documents and papers, carefully preserved. "These papers," he said, "represent not just land deeds, but autonomy, authority, the right to govern, to protect, to lead alongside me. But the real gift, Margaret, is your freedom to choose. You may stay, or you may leave. You may accept responsibility, or you may forge your own path. Today, you own yourself fully." Margaret felt tears prick her eyes. She had been sent across the ocean as a bride, as someone unwanted, and now she stood as a woman recognized for her courage, her intellect, and her heart. The power to choose, freely and without constraint, was the most profound gift of all. She looked at Tarza. "You trusted me," she whispered. "I always did," he replied, "even when the world did not." Recognition and celebration. The elders nodded in approval, and the entire community gathered to acknowledge Margaret's courage. There were drums, chants, and the slow rise of voices celebrating her journey. She had not only survived threats but had risen to meet them, learning the ways of the land, the people, and the man who had become her partner. For the first time, Margaret understood that she had been given not just land or safety, but a place where she belonged, a voice that mattered, and a partnership built on trust, respect, and equality. Reflection. That night, as Margaret sat by the fire with Tarza, she reflected on everything that had brought her here. She had arrived as a mail-order bride, forced into a life she did not want. She had faced fear, danger, and uncertainty. She had fought alongside. Tarza learned the ways of the Apache and discovered a strength she had never known. And now, as the firelight danced across their faces, she realized that the greatest gift was not in the chest, not in the land, not in the documents, but in the recognition of her own courage, her freedom, and the bond she shared with Tarza. Tarza reached out and took her hand, their fingers intertwining naturally. "You are free," he said softly, "but I hope you choose to stay. Not out of obligation, but because this is where you belong." Margaret smiled, feeling a deep, abiding certainty. "I choose to stay," she whispered, "because I belong here, with you." A new beginning. The desert night stretched out above them, vast and infinite. The stars shone brightly, reflecting the limitless possibilities that lay ahead. Margaret felt a sense of peace she had never known. She had been forced into a life once, but now she was free to shape it herself. The settlers' threats had been defeated. The past shadows had been confronted. And in the bond with Tarza, Margaret had found love, not imposed, not demanded, but earned, chosen, and reciprocated. In the quiet of the night, the land itself seemed to approve, whispering through the wind, through the rustle of the sagebrush, and through the distant call of the desert birds. She was home. And with that, Margaret and Taza began a new chapter, together, not as master and bride, but as equals, partners, and guardians of a land that had accepted them both. The wedding gift. The final gift, the one that left everyone speechless, was not gold, jewels, or property alone. It was freedom, respect, and choice. Taza had ensured that Margaret's worth was never measured by obedience or obligation. He had trusted her, honored her courage, and given her a place where her voice mattered. In that chest, alongside the deeds, were symbols of empowerment, the tools to make decisions, the authority to lead, and the reassurance that she would never again be forced to live.